What if the first domino falls quietly, but topples the whole system? It began in stillness, no sirens, no headlines, just a muted hum beneath the nation's skin. At precisely 5:12 a.m., a single encrypted message pulsed through a DOJ internal server, unremarkable on its surface, clinical in tone, marked with urgency only the trained eye could detect. The recipient? One of Ed Martin's junior aides. Half awake, more caffeine than man, he glanced at the subject line, blinked twice, and forwarded it up the chain. By 5:30, the document sat on Ed Martin's desk, untouched, glowing softly in the dim pre-dawn light of his Washington office. Ed Martin read the memo once, then again, slower. Then he smiled. The nation wouldn't feel it yet. But something had just shifted beneath the surface. At 5:52, the first letter was printed. DOJ letterhead. Language surgical. Its target? Senator Charles Schumer. The crime? A speech, delivered 2 years prior. A speech that dared to name names. A speech that refused to whisper. By 6:10, 5 more letters followed. Each one sent to a Democrat. Each one laced with polite venom. They weren't subpoenas. Not yet. But they didn't need to be. In the right hands, a whisper becomes a threat. Across town, in a modest brownstone apartment still lit by yesterday's lamp, freelance journalist Asha Mehta opened her inbox out of habit. The sender line froze her mid-sip. DOJ Communications Division. No embargo, no explanation. Just the letter. Attached. Labeled Administrative Inquiry. By 6:35, she was on the phone with her editor. By 6:47, The Atlantic had pulled all other leads. By 7 a.m., they had the headline, Breaking DOJ Letter Targets Schumer for Political Speech. No one blinked yet. Not until the story spread like a match in a dry field. Because buried in that article, halfway down in a paragraph easily overlooked, was a single sentence. Sources suggest the letters originated under direct instruction from U.S. Attorney Ed Martin, who was appointed by President Trump. That changed everything. The New York Times followed, then CNN, then MSNBC. The term political inquiry exploded across the feed. By 8 o'clock, a single phrase trended nationwide, speech on trial. At the White House, the shutters stayed closed. No comment, no denial. Just a press secretary offering 3 words. We defer comment. At DOJ headquarters, Ed Martin held a press briefing. Brief, controlled, unreadable. I'm simply doing my job, he said, voice clipped, jaw tight. But beneath his calm exterior, his pulse beat fast and hot. He didn't need the country's permission. He had the president's. And somewhere inside a marble-floored chamber 3 blocks away, Justice Sonia Sotomayor sat still in her chambers. She hadn't seen the letter yet, but the weight in the air told her it was coming. The whisper had begun, and the storm was already on its way. The louder the silence, the more dangerous the truth it hides. By 7:16 a.m., America was already awake, but it didn't feel like morning. Something about the light, too pale. Something about the headlines, too sharp. Teleprompters stumbled. Anchors forgot how to breathe mid-sentence. Inside MSNBC's Manhattan studio, veteran host Rachel Maddow tossed her script aside. Her voice, usually measured, shook with a kind of fury that only surfaces when disbelief runs out. Let me get this straight, she said, glasses halfway down her nose, staring dead into the camera. The Justice Department, under Trump's chosen appointee, has opened formal inquiries into speeches? Not threats, not crimes, words! She paused just long enough for the words to burn. And the first letter is dated the day after Trump's inauguration, elsewhere on CNN. Constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe leaned into his mic with the weight of history in his lungs. This is not oversight, he said coldly. This is weaponized prosecution. And if we allow political speech to be criminalized under the mask of procedure, we are not preserving democracy. We are preparing its grave. Across the nation, Twitter ignited. Not like a match, like a wildfire. #speech on trial, #dodgy letters, #Schumer under attack. By 9 a.m., every senator's phone buzzed with the same notification. Are you next? Inside the Capitol, aides scrambled. Press teams rewrote statements before they were finished. Senators canceled meetings with lobbyists and convened in closed rooms with their legal teams. But one office remained silent. Chuck Schumer's. No tweets, no camera, no denial, just silence. Deafening silence. And it was this silence that did the most damage. Because when a Senate leader doesn't defend himself publicly, people start to ask if he's already lost. The press camped outside his office. Cameras waited, not for a quote, for an expression, for a crack. But none came. Inside, Schumer sat at his desk, unmoving, his hand resting on a worn copy of the Constitution. He had faced storms before, but this wasn't weather. This was erosion from within. And in the shadows of Washington, a theory grew legs. This wasn't about crime. It was about control, because the moment you can punish speech, you don't need to punish action. By midday, the American Bar Association issued a single-line statement, short, sharp, and deliberate. The First Amendment does not yield. Not yesterday, not today, not ever. But even that wasn't enough to calm the fever. By 3 p.m., 3 more senators confirmed they'd received DOJ letters. One refused to speak. The other simply whispered, "I'm lawyering up." No one wanted to be the next Schumer, because even if you weren't guilty, you were already bruised. And yet, still, he said nothing. Until 6:03 p.m., when the Capitol rotunda darkened, and a lone microphone waited at the podium. Chuck Schumer stepped into frame. No staff, no notes, just a silence so heavy it cracked the air. The nation leaned in, and finally he spoke. When the target of power refuses to run, he forces the nation to listen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Chuck Schumer stood beneath the dome of democracy, and for a moment, it felt like the whole country held its breath. When a senator's speech is criminalized, he began, voice low but steady, the victim is not the voice. It's the republic that allowed it. Not a word out of place, not a gesture wasted. Today it's me, tomorrow it could be you, your post, your podcast, your protest sign. Because when prosecutors begin judging metaphors as crimes, they aren't preserving peace. They're performing obedience. Cameras clicked, but no one moved. "I am not on trial for threats," he said. "I am on trial for refusing to speak softly, and I will not apologize for volume when the truth demands thunder." A cold breeze passed through the rotunda, almost on cue. He glanced upward. The ceiling didn't blink, neither did he. "They want silence," Schumer said, "but I was not elected to be silent. I was elected to speak. And so I will, even if it makes someone powerful uncomfortable." He lifted the Constitution, not dramatically, reverently. If these words no longer protect the inconvenient, then they were never meant to protect the rest of us. No applause followed, no press conference spin, just one final line before he turned away. "You can subpoena a senator, but you cannot subpoena the truth." He stepped down, walked past the cameras, and for the first time that day, the silence finally broke, not with noise, but with clarity. Inside DOJ headquarters, Ed Martin watched the clip, his jaw clenched. He called his aide, just 2 words, "Move forward." At 7:14 p.m., a sealed file reached the desk of Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She read the first letter, then the second, then the third, and with a single stroke of her pen, She accepted jurisdiction. The next hearing was set for 9 a.m. the following Monday. The courtroom wasn't ready, the country wasn't either, but justice was. Sometimes justice doesn't wear armor, just resolve. The courtroom at Constitution Avenue hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Marble halls echoed with polished shoes and whispered predictions. Everyone knew the case wouldn't be routine because nothing about this story was. And at 8:59 a.m., with all eyes on the double doors, Justice Sonia Sotomayor entered. No fanfare, no robe billowing, just measured steps and the poise of someone who had read the Constitution more times than her own birth certificate. She did not look at the cameras. She didn't need to. The silence inside did the watching for her. She sat, smoothed her notes, and then raised her gaze. A pause, not for effect, for gravity. "This proceeding," she began, "is not about prosecuting a person. It is about prosecuting a principle. The rule of law must remain independent or it becomes performance." The room tightened. No one shifted. No one dared. Across from her, Ed Martin adjusted his tie, a gesture he had clearly rehearsed. He looked confident, but his hands betrayed a tremor. To her left sat Chuck Schumer, alone, no legal team, no aides, just a single copy of the Constitution on the table before him. His posture was calm, almost serene. One looked like a man trying to win, the other looked like a man with nothing left to prove. Justice Sotomayor leaned forward. "Mr. Martin," she said clearly, "you have the floor." The cameras turned. The air shifted. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was the moment Martin had been waiting for, and yet his voice caught slightly before it began. Confidence is loudest when it's trying to silence fear. "Your Honor," Ed Martin began, his voice rehearsed into smoothness, "I acted strictly within the bounds of my responsibilities as a U.S. attorney. My office received credible concerns regarding inflammatory language spoken by sitting senators. My obligation was clear: to investigate potential threats against judicial officers." He paused, looked toward the gallery, and straightened his cuffs with the calm of a man delivering a verdict. "These letters are not indictments. They are inquiries, nothing more." Justice Sotomayor tilted her head slightly. "And yet, Mr. Martin, they read more like summons than questions." Martin didn't flinch. He nodded as if expecting it. "The language used by Senator Schumer at a public rally," he said, "was not metaphor. It was a veiled threat, a warning directed at the highest court in the land." He signaled his aide. The courtroom screens lit up with grainy video from 2020. Schumer's voice filled the room, booming from the footage. "I want to tell you, Gorsuch. I want to tell you, Kavanaugh. You have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price." Martin paused the frame. Schumer's face frozen in mid-sentence. "This," he said, turning to the bench, "is what intimidation looks like. Not a difference of opinion, a deliberate message." Justice Sotomayor remained unreadable. Then, almost softly, she asked, "Mr. Martin, have you recently reviewed the speech and debate clause of the Constitution?" Martin's smile faltered. "Of course, Your Honor." Schumer leaned forward for the first time. His voice was calm, but his eyes were flint. "May I speak, Your Honor?" "Proceed," Sotomayor said without hesitation. "The Constitution," Schumer said, "protects not just speech, but uncomfortable speech. Metaphor is not violence, and when prosecutors begin parsing phrases like priests at confession, we move from law to thought policing." A murmur ran through the gallery. Martin smirked. "With respect, Senator, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence." Schumer smiled back, tighter, quieter. "And abuse of power," he replied, "is not justice dressed in a suit." The room simmered. Justice Sotomayor raised her hand, just a few inches. Silence returned instantly. "We are not here to litigate drama," she said. We are here to examine intent. Mr. Martin, what evidence do you have that these speeches led directly to unlawful actions?" Martin hesitated, just long enough to betray the truth. "Not directly, but the tone." "Tone," she cut in gently, "does not constitute criminality." For the first time, Martin looked cornered. His tie suddenly felt tighter. "Your Honor," he pushed, "we must consider the implications. We cannot wait until threats become actions." She studied him, quiet, still, razor-sharp. "And yet here you are," she said, "with no statute cited, no direct link, no crime charged, just letters, designed not to investigate but to intimidate." Martin's jaw clenched. His lips moved, but nothing followed. Across the room, Schumer sat back, saying nothing. Because sometimes silence says everything. And the real game, the one Martin thought he was playing, was already turning on him. What if the crime isn't what was said, but who dared to say it? The room still held its breath. Justice Sotomayor leaned back ever so slightly, letting the silence press in on Ed Martin like gravity. And then the door behind the witness box opened. The bailiff nodded. A new voice entered the fray, low, clear, weathered by experience. Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor, 30 years at the Department of Justice, took the stand. His reputation arrived before he did. "Mr. Kirshner," Justice Sotomayor said, "in your experience, how common is it for federal prosecutors to send letters of inquiry to sitting senators over political speech?" He didn't hesitate. "Never," he said flatly. "And I say that without hyperbole. We don't do it. Because we know what it looks like. It looks like a chilling effect. Like intimidation cloaked in protocol." Martin leaned forward, ready to pounce. "With respect," he said, "this is standard investigative procedure." Kirshner turned his head, not defensive, but surgical. "Standard would be subpoenas, grand jury summons, quiet inquiries. Not letters carefully timed and conveniently leaked to media before a single witness is contacted." Justice Sotomayor raised an eyebrow at that. Martin bristled. "Are you accusing my office of leaking classified documents?" Kirshner's tone never shifted. "I'm not accusing. I'm observing. The press had your letters before half the Senate did." Another murmur rippled through the crowd. One of Martin's aides shifted uncomfortably. Martin's jaw clenched tighter, the blood draining from his face. Justice Sotomayor tapped her pen once, a sound sharper than thunder in the silence. "Mr. Martin, do you have an explanation?" "Public interest," he said quickly. "Transparency. These letters were not classified." Kirshner raised one eyebrow, just slightly. "Transparency," he said slowly, "is not the same as spectacle. And when you dress intimidation up as legality, the result is not justice, it's theater." Martin interrupted, frustrated. "These weren't threats. They were notices, procedural." Schumer finally broke his silence. So were loyalty oaths. The room stilled. Kirshner leaned forward. "Senator Schumer's remarks, while passionate, are constitutionally protected. No prosecutor should mistake rhetoric for revolution unless they're looking to make headlines, not history." Justice Sotomayor didn't speak for several seconds. She simply looked at Martin, and for the first time, he looked away. "It's not just what's written. It's when and why." Justice Sotomayor rested a thin file on her desk. "These," she said, holding up a thick stack of crisp white envelopes, "are the letters your office issued to multiple members of Congress, correct?" Martin nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Each bears your signature, each dated January 21st. "Correct. The day after President Trump placed his hand on the Bible." Martin hesitated. "Yes." Her voice was even, but firm. "That's not just urgency, Mr. Martin. That's orchestration." He tried to speak, but her gaze cut sharper than any objection. You called these administrative, but every sentence reads like an accusation wrapped in polite wording. She opened one. Senator Schumer, you are hereby requested to explain your public remarks regarding members of the United States Supreme Court. The phrasing is deliberate, the timing is surgical. What precisely were you hoping to uncover? Martin's mouth opened slightly. We had concerns. Credible reports that inflammatory language could lead to coordinated unrest. Kersner let out a dry chuckle from across the room. Justice Sotomayor turned toward him. You find that humorous, Mr. Kersner? He nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. Because the only unrest those letters created was inside the Capitol itself. I've seen letters like these before, not at DOJ, but in political campaigns. You don't send them to find the truth. You send them to freeze your opponent before they speak. Martin slammed a hand on the desk. That's outrageous. My office doesn't engage in politics. And yet, Sotomayor said, voice quiet, every recipient has been a Democrat. Every letter dated within 24 hours of a power shift. Martin tried again to regain control. Coincidence? Schumer leaned in, his voice like granite. There is no such thing as a coincidence in Washington, Mr. Martin. Only plans poorly disguised as chance. The gallery shifted. Reporters scribbled faster. Justice Sotomayor raised one final letter. Senator Robert Garcia received this the same day he prepared a speech criticizing the Supreme Court. He didn't deliver it, not because it was false, but because he feared reprisal. Martin scoffed. A letter doesn't silence anyone. Schumer answered him without looking up. A loaded gun on the table doesn't need to fire. Everyone still stares at it. Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating. Justice Sotomayor placed the letters down, slowly, deliberately. Intent, she said softly, is rarely written in bold ink, but it bleeds through every envelope you've delivered. Martin's hands curled into fists beneath the table. For the first time in the entire hearing, he looked afraid. Fear doesn't need a verdict, just a whisper dressed as justice. The courtroom no longer whispered, it watched Ed Martin sweat behind his credentials, watched the air tighten around him like a vice turned slowly, word by word. Then the next witness was called. He entered quietly, no entourage, no blazer screaming for attention, just a suit, a worn folder, and a face hardened by public service. Congressman Robert Garcia. He sat with the poise of someone who hadn't come to speak, but to testify. Congressman, Justice Sotomayor said, you've been sent one of Mr. Martin's inquiry letters? Yes, Your Honor. And how did you respond? Garcia adjusted the mic. I didn't, he said flatly, because by the time I received it, I had already rewritten my speech. The room stiffened. I was preparing a statement about judicial overreach. It was pointed, but truthful. When the letter arrived, I deleted half of it, not because it was wrong, but because it might offend the wrong person. Martin leaned in, voice oily. Receiving a letter does not silence anyone, Congressman. Garcia didn't blink. Neither does a gun on the table, but everyone recalculates. That's the point. Even the court reporter paused for a moment. Garcia reached into his folder and produced his original speech. This is what I was going to say, he said. This is what democracy lost because one man in a suit wanted headlines. Justice Sotomayor took the folder. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted, something cold and ancient and judicial. Then a new voice rose. Amelia Warren, senior political correspondent at the Washington Post, called not for opinion but for pattern. In the last 30 days, she began, 8 senators and 3 representatives confirmed to me they received similar letters. Not one issued a public statement after receiving it. Not because they had anything to hide, but because the whisper of inquiry is louder than a scream in Washington. Martin scoffed. "That's paranoia, not precedent." Kersner stepped in, voice steely. "It's not paranoia if it's been practiced. And I practiced law at DOJ for 2 decades. We didn't play chess with subpoenas. We understood the weight of fear." Martin turned. "Are you suggesting I manufactured fear?" Kersner nodded slowly. "No, I'm suggesting you mailed it on." Justice Sotomayor raised her hand, silencing them both. She turned her pen between her fingers. 1 rotation, 2. Then she spoke. "We are no longer discussing the content of the letters. We are now discussing the cost." And with that, fear itself took the stand. Some words echo, others rewrite history. The chamber dimmed slightly as the sun shifted, but the bench remained bright. Justice Sonia Sotomayor opened a small legal binder, its pages lined with precedent, and began to read, not like a judge, but like a teacher. In Thomas v. Collins, 1945, the court ruled that political speech commands the highest constitutional protection, even when it's loud, even when it's inconvenient, especially then. Martin straightened, trying to appear unbothered. "Your Honor, the language I'm referring to goes beyond political expression." She turned the page, not waiting. In United States v. Brewster, 1972, the court reaffirmed that the speech and debate clause bars criminal prosecution for anything said in official legislative capacity. She looked up sharp and cold. "There are no caveats." Martin clenched his teeth. "But the implications, Schumer's words implied consequences. They may not have directly incited violence, but—" "Implied by whom?" she interrupted. "Fox News? Political adversaries? Your office's own interpretation?" She set the binder down. "Because your filings cite no case law, Mr. Martin. Only news clips, only opinion pieces, only manufactured outrage." Martin's mouth opened, then closed again. The silence said more than he could. Justice Sotomayor's voice softened slightly. "The Constitution does not criminalize discomfort. It does not protect power from criticism. And it certainly does not grant prosecutors the right to invent criminality from televised dissent." Martin tried to regroup. "But the sentiment, Your Honor, belongs to democracy," she cut in. "It belongs to disagreement, to public argument, to a nation brave enough to let words fly without needing to shoot them down." Then she leaned in, slowly, quietly, powerfully. "There is no greater danger to this republic than a prosecutor who believes himself a judge." And for the first time that day, Ed Martin did not speak, because there was nothing left to say. Sometimes the most powerful judgment isn't written in law, but in memory. The courtroom didn't stir. No ruling had been issued. No gavel had struck. But something deeper had already shifted, not on paper, but in the air, the kind of shift that makes the powerful sweat and the silent feel heard. Ed Martin sat still. The sharp lines of his suit now seemed like armor worn too long. His confidence, polished and practiced, had turned brittle. Justice Sonia Sotomayor leaned back, her pen no longer moving. She stared for a long, deliberate moment at the sealed folder on her bench, the one bearing the DOJ insignia, the one filled with Martin's letters. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with a tone that rang like a bell in a cathedral. "Mr. Martin," she said, "you speak of prosecutorial responsibility. You reference threats, intimidation, national integrity, but when pressed you offer no statute, no consequence, no provable crime." Martin's lips parted, but no sound emerged, because he knew she was right. She opened the binder one last time. "There is no doctrine that allows discomfort to dictate prosecution. There is no article that grants the state the right to muzzle dissent. And there is no precedent that excuses fear-mongering as legal strategy." Martin sat upright, as if posture alone might protect him. But there was no armor for what came next. Justice, she continued, requires more than ambition. It requires integrity, and integrity does not leak letters to the press. It does not selectively target opponents, and it does not wield silence like a blade. Every word landed like a brick against the edifice of Martin's career. He reached for something, anything, but found only the tremor in his fingertips. Then, from the other side of the courtroom, Chuck Schumer stood. He didn't speak immediately. He waited, let the silence breathe, let the moment settle. Then he said simply, "I was elected to use my voice, so today I will." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't triumphant. It was measured, like steel forged over fire. "I do not stand here to defend my image. I stand here to defend principle. Because if I apologize for a metaphor today, I forfeit the right to speak truth tomorrow." He walked to the bench and placed his hand on the Constitution before him. The document does not tremble at raised voices. It doesn't shy away from protest. It demands only one thing: that we speak, especially when speaking is difficult. Martin didn't interrupt. He couldn't. "Fear," Schumer said, "doesn't always shout. Sometimes it knocks with a letterhead and tells you to choose your words carefully. But the moment we obey that knock, we've already surrendered." He turned toward the gallery. "Today it's me. Tomorrow it's you." Silence followed. And then Justice Sotomayor closed her notebook. No flourish, no performance, just a single word delivered like a sentence. Enough. The gavel didn't fall like thunder. It fell like a scalpel, precise, final. The courtroom emptied like a theater after a tragedy. Reporters typed in silence. Spectators exhaled for the first time in hours. No one applauded. No one dared. Because what they had witnessed was not a trial. It was a lesson. Outside the courthouse, Ed Martin emerged first. No podium, no statement. Just the blank stare of a man realizing he had mistaken fear for power. Cameras clicked. Headlines formed before his first step hit the marble. DOJ under fire. Martin's letters spark ethics probe. Congress demands oversight. By evening, the Department of Justice confirmed an internal review. Congress requested every correspondence issued by Martin's office since Inauguration Day, and the narrative changed. He was no longer U.S. Attorney Ed Martin. He was embattled prosecutor, a man who thought he could bend democracy with paper and ended up buried beneath it. Inside the chamber, Chuck Schumer lingered for a moment, then rose. As he passed the bench, he looked once at Justice Sotomayor and nodded, not in victory, but in recognition. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Justice had spoken, and for once it hadn't stuttered. The screen faded, but the final line remained. Speech can be quoted, but truth echoes.